A very warm welcome to you all. My name is Jessica Lancan-Frost, Policy Officer at NOUT. It is my pleasure to be chairing today's event on the future of neighbourhood plans. Firstly, I'd like to quickly run through a few housekeeping announcements, some of which are shown on screen. Do use the Q&A function throughout the event to put questions to our speakers, and the chat function to interact with your fellow delegates and to share any information or links. If you require any technical support, please do post in the chat, and my NOUT colleagues will try their best to help. The closed caption feature, subtitles, can be accessed by all attendees at any time during today's event. For desktop laptop users, to turn on closed captions, please select Show Captions. The button will be labelled CC. If the button is not visible, please select the three dots on the bottom right corner of the screen. Then, please select Captions. After that, you'll be prompted to click Show Captions, so please select this option. If you are using a mobile device or tablet, please scroll across the menu on the bottom of your screen and select Captions. You will then need to click Show Captions. Once the captions are on, you can access a live transcription of the event. If you have selected the closed caption feature, please use the reactions feature by ticking the yes button, green emoji with a tick, to show us that closed captions are working at your end. If you're experiencing technical difficulties, please contact NOUT support via the chat and we will endeavour to rectify the issue. After the event, we will send out all presentations, the chat, and any other useful information. And we will also be inviting your feedback on today's event. So please do look out for a feedback form when it pops up on your screen following the conclusion of the webinar. Now, NOUT would like to thank our partners, Clear Council's Insurance, CCLA, and Blasher Illumination for the extensive support for our online events. So, today's event aims to reevaluate the continued significance of neighbourhood planning and make a case for its sustenance to the new government. We also hope it will help you to rediscover your passion for launching and shaping a neighbourhood plan in your area, as well as giving you indispensable tips, guidance, and advice necessary to embark on this pivotal undertaking. So, I'm thrilled to be joined today by a brilliant panel of speakers. We have Andrew Towlerton, Planning Advisor at the Society of Local Council Clerks, Shah Roselman, Clerk of Newport Pagnell Town Council, Madeline Gohin, Neighbourhood Planning Officer at Locality, and Katie Warrington, Self-Build Officer at South Gloucestershire Council. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to Andrew. You're on mute, Andrew.
Thank you. Not worrying. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this really important event, and for me, a very timely event as well. I'm here to talk about. My name's Andrew Towlerton. I am a planner, which I'll touch on a little bit, and I'm the National Planner of the Society of Local Council Clerks. On to the next slide, that'd be fantastic. For me, neighbourhood planning is perhaps the most radical innovation in the planning system in probably since the 1940s, as I see it. You've got to remember when it started, there was a lot of criticism, a lot of scepticism. You know, it was going to be a NIMBYs charter. It was bound to fail. It's never going to work. And 10 years on, I think it's been a tremendous success. Well over 3,000 neighbourhood plans produced. Not over 90% in parished areas. It's not been an NIMBY charter. It's far from it. And not only in terms of the why, there's other benefits. I mean, the referendum, there's hardly any which have failed at referendum. It's brought thousands of people into the planning system which would otherwise not gotten involved. It's been a really opportunity to make planning much more transparent, democratic, and arguably bottom up. And there's some real innovations, particularly around second homes, protection of heritage assets, protection of green spaces. And I do want to emphasise the referendum bit, because it's not mentioned other things. from my knowledge, and I've worked in planning for far too long, I'm not aware of any other planning document which is required to go through a referendum before it's approved. And I suspect there's a strong reason behind that, because I think many local planning authorities don't have the confidence that they would get local plans or other documents approved. So just going on, neighbourhood planning's not been perfect, it's not been a thing, but for me, it's been most innovative and one of the most transformative events of the planning system in the last 10 years. And I really, we as a sector should be really proud about what we've done to drive it forward in its widest sense. And there's been a lot of commitment from the sector and a lot of, there's a lot of success, and we should be very proud of what we've done. Thank you. However, we are heading for uncertain times, and that's really why I think this is really good. We're having discussions the same. Obviously, we've got a new government in place, and they've said there's going to be a blitz of planning reforms. Now, the first signs, the indications are looking reasonably promising for neighbourhood plans. The government said that they were going to basically scrap all the reforms produced by the government the planning reforms they introduced last year. Now, there are a couple of tweaks the government, not major ones, which the previous government made to neighbourhood plans to strengthen them. And this government has said that they're not minded to remove those. And there's also other things about government statements in there about, the manifesto, it said we'll ensure local communities continue to shape house building. So it would suggest that neighbourhood planning is here to stay. And I do think, and that's what I do hope to want to do. But there are some concerns. Clearly, we've got no commitment from the government from neighbourhood planning beyond this at the end of this financial year. And that's obviously a particular concern. What also the government's been saying is that they're going to work with the builders, not the blockers. And I'm aware that many people consider neighbourhood plans and parish councils on the blockers' side. Indeed, I was at recently an event, which was like a roundtable event involving developers, planners, and other people. And somebody described as neighbourhood saying they should scrap neighbourhood plans and described them as vacuous. That came from a planner. It didn't come from the developers, although I do suspect that many of the development industry support that. I'm sad to say many critics of neighbourhood planning come from my profession, and they're really unhappy about it. We're also seeing, I'm sure other people will talk about this, is neighbourhood planning becoming much more constrained and stifled. When they started this process many years ago, they were going to look different than planning documents. They don't look like planning documents. And I'm sure other ones are going to give examples. Increasingly, people are being constrained by the planning system. They want to do policies around environmental. They want to do sustainability. They want to work outside the box. But neighbourhood planning is increasingly becoming more unconstrained and making everyone to not be able to do that. And until we get on things, unfortunately for me, my concern about a lot of the planning reforms, and this is where I hope neighbourhood planning is not going, is we're back to where we were 5-6 years ago, where we're not talking about planning, we're talking about house building. All the planning is focused on building houses, and everything else tends to seem to get a little bit ignored, despite people saying climate change is everything's important. Thank you. Next slide. So for me, we are at a crossroads, and the other speakers will talk on this in more depth as they go along. For me, we are at a critical point of the future neighbourhood plans. Where I'm sitting, the enthusiasm for neighbourhood plans is waning a little bit, and that worries me. I also am concerned that some of the critics of neighbourhood planning, which have never really gone away, are starting to come a bit more to the front. They are pushing us towards the blockers side. I mentioned that's only I'm aware of developers, or also say, well, if the government, if you want to build a lot more, you want a lot more development, what you need to do is relax the planning rules. And in terms of the relaxation of the planning rules, we're not talking about local plans, we're also talking about neighbourhood plans. Why can't you trim down neighbourhood plans, or at the very least, move them away from influencing house building or that type of development? But that's going to be incredibly difficult for us. So we do need to have a discussion about how we reinvigorate planning. And there's a number of things we need to do. We as a sector, because we've led the neighbourhood planning of things, I think we should be at the forefront campaigning and lobbying for a continuing role for neighbourhood planning. And when I talk about neighbourhood planning, I don't just talk about neighbourhood plans, I talk about neighbourhood planning in its widest sense. And that government commitment from the government needs to be quite tangible as well. We do need them to make some clear indications about the future funding for neighbourhood plans. I am disappointed that the government haven't committed themselves to effectively saying that the community infrastructure levy will be applied to all parts of the country. You may not be aware or not, but if you're in an area which is like a development contribution and you've got neighbourhood plan, you receive a high share of that. There's also needs to be some strength about the weight attached to neighbourhood plans. Often it seems to be at the discretion of individual local authorities on how much weight they attach to neighbourhood plans. And that can bring differences and bring some uncertainty and some concerns. And also, they need to remove some of the shackles on neighbourhood plans to make them truly comprehensive. So neighbourhood plans can deal with sustainable development much more than they did previously. They can introduce environmental standards. And there need to be clearer benefits to the communities in terms of what they've got to do. As I see it, the risk is that we as a sector some of us may slightly disheartened by the planning system and then start moving towards the blockers. What I think neighbourhood planning and what does really as a key part in the government's commitment to making planning truly democratic, accountable and generally bottom up. They're just my thoughts. I do really think it's a really good time to have this discussion, and I'm welcome to take any discussion and take any questions as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. We'll come to questions at the end once all the presentations have been delivered. So now I'd like to hand over to Shah.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all here today talking about neighbourhood plans. I can't think of a more exciting subject. I'm going to take you on the journey that Newport Pagnell Parish has gone through, which is 3 phases of neighbourhood plan. We're now just about to take our 3rd neighbourhood plan to referendum. But it's quite an important lesson in terms of the various things that have happened during our various neighbourhood plans and the changes that there have been both in government thinking and in local authority thinking from the 1st neighbourhood plan to the 3rd neighbourhood plan. So starting with neighbourhood plan number 1, the referendum took place in 2016, and we thought that was pretty innovative. We allocated a new site for 1,000 new homes, which was twice what the local plan called for. That land was owned by the planning authority, but because the planning authority sat on their hands for 8, now going on 9 years, they failed to ensure that they had a contractor for that land, and the net result of that is that build will only start in October 2025. So those people who are accusing parishes of NIMBYism, I would suggest that from our perspective, the NIMBYism sits with the local authority in terms of their lack of ability to get things moving on home building. What else did we do in version 1 of our neighbourhood plan? We allocated a further 300 more homes, all on brownfield sites, and we set out a major design policy for the major sites. The most important thing I believe that we did in our version 1 of our neighbourhood plan was we set out a policy for S106 funding and also for S278 funding, that's highways transport funding. This helped to negate the issue that I saw a question raised earlier of SIL not being in our area. Well, SIL wasn't in our area either, which is why we specifically put in S106 policies into our neighbourhood plan. Those have stood us in really good stead and has meant that we've got the required infrastructure agreed now with the developer who has taken on the major development, and some of the smaller developments have already been built. We've got that funding in the pocket. In fact, we've used some of it already. The main development site will include a pre and primary school, a local centre, a community centre, and sports facilities, both on and off site. And because we agreed to a certain number of sports facilities off-site, we were able to negotiate that the developer could therefore build more housing, and therefore should be providing us the land value of that land, or the housing value of that land, which we calculated at the time to be £2 million. That is index linked, and that contribution will go into our existing Woolen Road sports ground. So you really need to have your hat on, your financial hat on, when you start thinking about what you're going to trade off on the site. If you're providing extra land for developers to put housing on the site, then you should get funding for that out of that agreement. There's a decent housing mix. It was 31% in our original neighbourhood plan, but we have agreed with the new developer who's been appointed that we are happy to sit at 50% social housing. They are a developer who's funded on the basis of social housing rather than funded on the basis of house sales. And it incorporates a certain amount of shared ownership, and it incorporates a certain amount of homes that must go to local residents. So the housing mix is quite important to us. Next page, please. That's just part of the design features that we put into our V1 neighbourhood plan. Next page. Our neighbourhood plan version 2 in 2019. At the time, neighbourhood plans had an effective 2-year duration. That is now 5 years, and hopefully that will stay under Section 14. But at the time, it was only 2 years. And by 2019, our neighbourhood plan was out of date. So we thought it was time to do something to ensure that it stayed in date. We put together a new neighbourhood plan that updated the status of what had been developed, what remained to be developed. We didn't allocate any new housing. And as a result of that, no referendum was required. We were required, in order to put a new neighbourhood plan in, to make a significant change that was large enough to have a new neighbourhood plan, but not large enough to go to referendum. And we balanced that rather carefully by adding into the neighbourhood plan a new design study which guided development concepts and helped to protect our historical town, because Newport Pagnell is a doomsday town that goes back many, many, many years. And so lots of history in our town, 14th century buildings, 12th century buildings, and the design concept does help to protect those, even more than the listed building status we have on a number of the properties in our town. So the whole idea of V2 was to keep the plan fresh, keep it dated later than the Unitary Authority local plan, didn't need to go to referendum, was approved by the examiner, and was made in 2019. Next slide, please. Neighbourhood plan version 3. We've just completed. It's been to examination, and it goes to referendum on the 17th of October, and we're busy gently kicking all our residents to please go out and vote. We were kind of hoping we could combine it with a more national vote, but unfortunately the Conservative Party decided to go early and have the general election much earlier in the year than we were anticipating. So the neighbourhood plan will stand on its own at this new referendum. And so we really need to get people out there to vote for the neighbourhood plan, because otherwise the only people who will turn up at the vote are those who have some objection to it. And so lots and lots of advertising going on our part at the moment. What does this new plan do? It focuses a lot on the town centre. We look at going up to 3rd storey on a lot of our buildings. And we've attached to that a requirement that if you are going up to 3rd storey, you have to do something to improve the facade of those dreadful 1960 buildings that sit in the middle of our historical buildings. So there will be an improvement to the historical look of the town. It again keeps the neighbourhood plan fresh. It adds new sporting facilities. It sets aside land outside of the development envelope for an Aston Martin Heritage Centre, which we've been negotiating with the Aston Martin Heritage Trust. It keeps the S106278 policies intact, so where that funding hasn't come in yet and development on some of the sites hasn't started, we will still get that funding. And it did introduce a revolutionary new biodiversity policy, specifically identifying sites to promote or to provide a green wildlife corridor around the parish. Unfortunately for us, the examiner had some problems with that policy. And while he has allowed us to keep the policy in the plan, he has required us to remove the specific sites that we had identified or allocated for biodiversity offsetting, saying that he believes that this is not a responsibility for a neighbourhood plan, but rather the responsibility of the local planning authority. We found this extraordinarily interesting because the local planning authority is also writing a new local plan, and they have completely forgotten to allocate any biodiversity offsetting sites. In my discussion with the head planning officer, his view was that all biodiversity offsetting will take place on site, which is absolute rubbish, because we happen to know that right now there is a development going on immediately to the south of us where there is biodiversity offsetting taking place, and some of it is happening on our land here in Newport Pagnell, even though the development itself is outside of Newport Pagnell. So we think that local authorities need to pick up their act, need to start at the call for their sites to request that anybody who puts in a call for site has included a biodiversity assessment and a farming value assessment of their sites. We have discussed the matter with our MP, and I think that's certainly something most parishes should be doing these days, particularly given the new government, discussing what's getting in the way of housing development and why biodiversity offsetting is a particularly important element. If you will recall, there was a lot of mention made by the Labour Party about the idea of sites that are greenfield sites versus sites that are brown or greyfield sites. And a greyfield site is just a greenfield site that has a low value. So what is that low value? Well, it can be a low value in terms of either its ability to improve biodiversity significantly, or a low value because it has a very low farming value. And so someone out there, the Labour Party, the planning authorities, needs to start thinking about how are they going to prove what is a greyfield site as opposed to a greenfield site. And as we weren't allowed to do it in our neighbourhood plan, clearly it is the responsibility of those local authorities to do. Just seeing the question pop up, is it possible to appeal against the examiner's ruling? No, it is not possible to appeal against the examiner's ruling. We were allowed to make one comment back to the examiner on the subject. He declined to accept our argument. Examiners can be a problem, and sometimes it's a question of choosing the right examiner. I must confess, I did advise my counsellors to choose an alternative examiner, but they decided against that, which in my opinion was a mistake, because who you choose as examiner is absolutely crucial, and they don't all take the same decisions by any stretch of the imagination. So that's where we are in terms of neighbourhood plan 3. For the future of neighbourhood planning, as Andrew has said, there is some light given for neighbourhood plans continuing, in that they haven't been excluded from the latest revisions to the NPPF and the latest thinking around the NPPF consultation. Section 14, that all-important section, is still in. The 5-year duration of neighbourhood plans is still in. But there is a reticence by the current government to applaud neighbourhood plans for the value that they can bring. It wasn't the Labour government's idea. They were as shocked as the Conservative government were about how successful neighbourhood plans have been. As Andrew says, the people who typically point out that they don't like neighbourhood plans tend to be planning authorities, rather than anybody else, and certainly not the local population, who tend to like neighbourhood plans considerably. They regard them as their own plan for their own town. I think we need to keep the pressure high, and the way in which we keep the pressure high on neighbourhood plans is each parish needs to have a discussion with their MP if they are thinking of starting on a new neighbourhood plan, or even if they have an existing neighbourhood plan that they will at some stage be revising. Have that discussion with your MP. Reinforce in his mind the value of neighbourhood plans, so that he can take that forward to Parliament and continue to support neighbourhood plans so they don't disappear entirely off of the landscape. If they do, we will lose a lot of the power that we have through neighbourhood plans, because in the shaping of our neighbourhood plan, we have the ability to influence what goes on in our towns and parishes in a way that is second to none. It gives us more power than any other tool has given us at any time whatsoever, other than our ability to exist at all. Thank you. I think that's all from me.
Thank you, Shah. And firstly, before we move on to our next presentation, could I please remind everyone to put your questions to our speakers in the Q&A box? Anyway, now over to you, Madeleine.
Wait, just 1 second. All right, can you see my slides? Perfect.
Yes, okay.
All right, hi everyone, thanks for being here today. So as mentioned, I'm a neighbourhood planning officer working at locality within the team that manages the neighbourhood planning support program led by MACLG. And over the next few minutes, I'll run through some quick thoughts on the future of neighbourhood planning, particularly in light of the recent neighbourhood planning policy framework consultation, and what we can learn from that. And then I'll also give you a quick overview of the support available via the neighbourhood planning support program. So as quickly touched on by Andrew, as you may be aware, the government recently published a new consultation, which I think closed last week or earlier this week, on proposed changes to National Planning Policy Framework, and also sort of hinting on wider proposals for changes to the planning system. And as part of this, they notably proposed to maintain the recent changes to paragraph 14 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which protects neighbourhood plans against the presumption in favour of sustainable development. This is a very sort of positive sign for the future of neighbourhood planning, as it indicates that the new government recognises the benefits of this recent strengthening of neighbourhood plans in the decision-making process. So just as a reminder, paragraph 14 essentially states that in situations where the presumption in favour of sustainable development applies, and so leaves areas concerned at risk of inappropriate development through speculative applications, the presumption doesn't apply to neighbourhood plan policies, so they can continue to carry full weight, provided that the plan is up to 5 years old, so no more than 5 years since it was made, and that it contains policies and allocations to meet its identified housing requirements. And before the last December 23 update, there were more criteria to be met, and the plan had to be only 2 years old or less. So all in all, more neighbourhood plans are protected under this paragraph than used to be the case, and for longer. So knowing that this will be maintained is definitely a sort of positive sign. When it comes to the sort of rest of the government's proposed changes to the NPPF and any indication of their wider objectives for the planning system outlined in this consultation, a lot of the sort of key priorities could all really benefit from tapping into the power of neighbourhood planning as a tool for community involvement in growth delivery. So that's something that we, our locality, made sure to highlight in our response to the consultation, and that we'll keep promoting whenever we get a chance. And I thought, especially in light of this idea of sort of trying to highlight how neighbourhood plans and neighbourhood planning can be helpful, both at national level and local level, for local planning authorities to meet and to support some of their key objectives. I thought I'd go through some of these. So something that's highly relevant to the government's overall objectives for the planning system is the role of neighbourhood plans in bringing forward development across the country. There's research showing that many neighbourhood plans have brought forward additional housing site allocations above the local plan requirements. And in our experience, neighbourhood planning groups are also often seeking to bring forward more affordable housing than would otherwise have been the case, which is all very relevant to what we know are some of the key objectives of the government. So in all of this, neighbourhood plans, they're particularly effective at unlocking local opportunities for growth, but in ways that best meet local needs and circumstances. As we all know, it's not just about how much growth, but also to what extent and how it can actually meet local needs and aspirations at a local level. And for example, in our experience, the sort of very locally specific and community-led nature of neighbourhood plans make them very effective at providing smaller site allocations, which can often be quicker to deliver and implement than some of the larger sites that may sometimes be allocated in local plans. So this ability of neighbourhood planning to help identify how to best deliver growth locally is especially relevant also for to the government's plans for what we know so far as some sort of universal coverage of strategic planning and better cross-boundary collaboration on identifying key sort of key development needs strategically. We know that all of that will definitely need to be designed around meaningful community engagement, but also generally connected to how these strategic aims will then need to be translated back to small-scale, locally specific growth delivery on the ground. And that's an area where neighbourhood planning can also be very helpful. In terms of other proposals by the government, their proposed approach to green belt release is also an area where neighbourhood planning can be of huge value. Again, in our experience, because neighbourhood plans have enabled many communities to support development in their area, neighbourhood planning groups would be well placed to set out detailed changes to green belt.
Yeah, Madeline, I'm ever so sorry. We can't see your slideshow very well. It's not in full screen mode and the slides aren't moving on.
I'm still on the same slide.
Okay, which slide is that?
Neighbourhood planning and the 2024 NPPF consultation slide.
Okay, we can't see that one. We can only see the title slide at the moment. Would you mind trying again at screen sharing and also making the presentation full screen?
Yes. Sorry, I believe that was the case. Okay, I'll try again. My slides aren't essential anyway, but right. Share my screen. Okay, what can you see now? Sorry,
at the moment I can't see a presentation. I can see you've started screen sharing, but I can't see slides.
Could you share the slides then? Sorry.
I
mean, otherwise, yes, really, I can just keep. It's not essential.
Yeah.
I'll share them now. Thank you.
Yeah.
The one after that? Yeah, perfect. All right, thank you. Okay, let me just set up my, all right, so yes, I was just mentioning how keeping in mind this this ability of neighborhood planning to help communities, to enable communities to support development in their area, neighborhood planning groups would also be well placed to set out detailed changes to greenbelt boundaries, so as to facilitate site allocations in these constrained areas that can, in a way that best meets the needs of local communities. And then also regarding the proposed golden rules that would need to be met by developers where greenbelt release occurs. This is also an area where neighborhood plan policies would be very well placed to help set out and inform locally specific green space requirements and infrastructure needs that best reflect local needs and aspirations because of all the work that goes into a neighbourhood plan, including, for example, in terms of identifying local green space for local green space designations and so on. And then another area of focus that is relevant to neighbourhood planning is the preparation of localized design codes, master plans and guides for areas of most change and potential. This is also something where, in our experience, neighbourhood plans have been particularly effective in supporting placemaking through locally designed guidance codes and master plans for locally planned growth. And this is because local communities are often best placed to set out locally desired outcomes, and their active involvement in the design coding process is really essential to ensure that growth, which will be delivered through the planning system, is done in such a way that meets local needs and aspirations. And this is something that everyone benefits from anyway. And then something else to keep in mind, which also echoes some of the previous presentations, is another government priority around the need to address both the process and the consequences of climate change. And this is something where really, in our experience, neighbourhood plan development plans and orders have an important role to play in this. So this is something that can be promoted and talked about because they enable communities to set out locally embedded visions and solutions that can boost both the local and the wider resilience to climate change. And that's something that can be helpful for local planning authorities as well. If they have strategic aims around climate change in their local plan, this can be sort of further defined and supported in neighbourhood plans as well. So, for example, it could be through site allocations for local renewable energy projects, specific requirements or explicit support for locally relevant energy design features of housing development, but also through further non-planning action and objectives that can prompt further community-led initiatives outside the neighbourhood plan. So through neighbourhood development orders or SIL contributions as well. So these are all, and sort of these small incremented changes that in the case of neighbourhood planning are backed by strong community support are an essential piece of the puzzle if we're looking at the need to minimise and to prepare for the consequences of climate change. So also an area where neighbourhood planning can do a lot. So yeah, I just thought that looking at all these key priorities that we know will be part of the future of the planning system, and thinking of how neighbourhood planning is very relevant to all these and can make powerful contributions to all these aspects might be helpful in the context of thinking about the future of neighbourhood planning. And of course, as we know that a lot of voluntary time and effort go into the preparation of neighbourhood plans, this all needs support. In an important part of that is the government's ongoing investment in the neighbourhood planning support programme, which leads me on to the next slide. So yeah, I just wanted to give you a really quick overview of the support that is available via this programme that we here at Locality, we manage it on behalf of MHLG. But before I do, I just need to clarify that all I can do is just that. I can tell you about the support available until under the current contract, which runs under the end of March 25. But beyond that, I can't tell you about the future funding beyond this current contract because at Locality we don't have any information on this either. Yes, so under this programme, all qualifying bodies preparing a neighbourhood plan or updating it or a neighbourhood development order can get up to £10,000. And then on top of that, if a group meets at least one of the criteria that you can see here, they should also be eligible for another £8,000 to be used towards the preparation of their neighbourhood plan. And then next slide. Then running in parallel to grant support, groups may also be eligible for a range of specialist technical support offer, provided that at least one of the following criteria are met. So you can have a look at this. It's also all available on our website. And then the next slide will give you an idea of the type of support that is on offer through this route. And then next slide. Just to highlight that we have available on our website a range of toolkits and guidance that can be quite helpful just to dip in and out of whenever if you're preparing your neighborhood plan. We have quite a lot of them. And then finally, next slide. Just to flag that if you have a query about the preparation of a neighborhood plan, you can you can have a look at our FAQs that are quite comprehensive already, but if you have further questions, you can submit an online query via our advice service system, and we always aim to get back to you within 2 working days. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. And now over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi everyone, I'm Katie Warrington. I'm a Self-Build Officer at South Gloucestershire Council. Thanks. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as well as being a self-build officer at South Gloucester Council, I'm also an expert on the Right to Build Task Force. So the Right to Build Task Force was established by the National Custom and Self-Build Association to help local authorities. So that's NACSPA. And we are part funded by MHCLG as well to provide support and training to local authorities. So basically supporting customer self-build house building and how to provide that. We provide a range of advice and support as well. And I've put the Right to Build Task Force website there as well for resources. Next slide, please. So the government missive is to deliver more houses, including more affordable homes and diversification of supply. So that's where neighbourhood plans can help to deliver on that basis. We at the task force are supportive of neighbourhood plans and think they're important mechanisms for supporting and delivering customer self-build homes. So how does the NPPF deal with neighbourhood planning? So I'm just highlighting in the next couple of slides the relevant paragraphs. So there's paragraph 61, and that talks about needs of groups with specific housing requirements. And then with paragraph 63, that talks about different groups in the community should be assessed. And these groups include people wishing to commission or build their own homes. So that's self and custom house building. Next slide, please. So there's a number of paragraphs that outline about neighbourhood planning. So the key ones, and I've referenced the ones that are in the consultation, so they're slightly different to the previous version. So this is paragraph 30, and that's about neighbourhood planning gives communities the power to develop a shared vision for their area. Neighbourhood plans can shape, direct, and help to deliver sustainable development, and by influencing local planning decisions as part of the statutory development plan. So that's whereby, if the council doesn't have a local adopted local plan that has any policies to do with self and custom house building, if the neighbourhood plan or a neighbourhood plan team are minded that way and they want to support that and they think that will help resolve any local need or issues, that's where the neighbourhood plan can address that with a specific policy. Similarly, neighbourhood plans can also have opportunities for allocating small and medium-sized sites. So that specifically can deal with, that's a good hook for self and custom house building and community-led housing. Next slide, please. And lastly, to do with the NPPF context, there's paragraph 129. So that's where it talks about how neighbourhood planning groups have an important role in identifying the special qualities of each area and explaining how this should be reflected in development, both through their own plans and by engaging in the production of design, policy, guidance and codes by local planning authorities and developers. So by its very nature, self and custom build provides the opportunity for local people to have an input into the design of new homes. And self and custom build design codes provide the opportunity to ensure it integrates with the character and visual appearance of the neighbourhood, identifying designs and materials appropriate to the area. Next slide, please. So NACSPA identifies that neighbourhood plans allow communities to have more say, providing measures for communities who want to see the choice and diversification that self-build can offer. And then in the University of Reading's Impact of Neighbourhood Planning in England report to MHCLG, they acknowledged that examples of innovation concerning housing provision is also a positive outcome of neighbourhood development plans, and that includes self and custom build projects. Next slide, please. So please ignore the 700 figure, because Andrew's clearly got more up-to-date data than I have. So there are 3,000 made neighbourhood plans out there. And last year, the Right to Build Task Force commissioned some research by Chamberlain Walker. And of those made plans out there, they found that there were 238 that had reference and/or policies that included self and custom house building. And those vary in terms of the type of policies and nature of policies that are out there. Some just reference it saying there's support for it, and then there's those that go a bit further, where there's a hook, or there's more sort of effective support where they're allocating sites, or there's a percentage on larger developments in the area that are going to provide a specific number of self and custom house building plots or homes there. If you could go to the next slide, please. So we all know that neighbourhood planning provides a powerful set of tools for local people, and for the types of development to meet the community's needs and align the ambition with strategic needs. So, and it can also really helpfully tackle local housing needs and diversity issues. So if there is a local need for agricultural workers dwellings, or smaller homes, or first-time buyer homes, or helping to retain younger people in smaller communities, there's different types of policies that can be proactive and sort of address these local housing issues and needs. And that's where customer self-build housing is really sort of can be a powerful tool and a powerful policy in a neighbourhood plan. We are seeing this increasingly, that neighbourhood plans are targeting customer self-build housing to diversify the local supply, and it's a much more palatable type of housing for people. It's one that the local community have maybe expressed a local need or a demand for on their self-build register, and that's where neighbourhood plans can really direct that need and put it into a really sort of specific policy. Next slide, please. So as I said, there's a range of sort of different policies types out there, and a range of ways that they can provide custom self-build house building. So at the top there, I'd say that allocations is a really useful policy, as we know that land availability is a challenge for aspiring custom self-builders. So by allocating sites or plots, that's a really useful way of providing that type of diversification of housing supply. There's also ways you can do that through a site exception policy, that maybe that plots on the edge of a settlement boundary are only acceptable if they're self and custom house building, or therefore affordable housing, etc. So that's where a policy can really sort of drill down into that local housing need and issue, as I said, as well as sort of a connection test. So retaining those in the local community, or bringing people back who've grown up in that community and want to return to that community for maybe other reasons, that there's family there, or they want to support, or they work in the area. And then there's affordable with a capital A, and then co-housing in more of an urban setting. So there's policies out there that can do more than just provide support. The generic support isn't going to be as helpful as ones that are more specific at dealing with a local housing issue there. Next slide, please. So just to mention a local example for myself, so this is Oldbury Neighbourhood Development Plan. This was made in 2018. And this includes 3 policies on new housing in the area. And policy 1 there, which has got the proposals plan, has outlined in blue the settlement boundary, and then the areas in red are those allocated for new housing, and that's rural exception sites, as well as self and custom house building plots included in that. Next slide, please. So the other 2 policies are policies 4 and 5 in that Oldbury neighbourhood plan. And as you can see here, with the policy 4, there's site 9, which is West Marsh Lane. So that is a rural exception site, and that's for up to 8 dwellings. And included in that are up to 2 self and custom build plots. And I know the background to this site is that it's land provided by a local farming family, and they want their grown children to return to the village and provide support. So that's where they've provided 2 self-build plots for their children, and then as part of that there is affordable housing going on the rest of the site. So that's a really useful way of addressing this local housing issue and need, and putting it in a really specific policy and allocating multiple sites there. Some other examples I can signpost are the Petersfield neighbourhood plan that was made in 2015, and it's one of the earlier ones that are sort of allocated sites for custom and self-build house building. So that's policy HP7, where they've allocated 2 sites, and one of those is at the land north of Reservoir Lane, which was for 11 self-build plots. There's also examples at East Devon Council. So there's Broadclist neighbourhood plan, and there's 2 policies included in there. And one of those is policy H2, and that is for Broadclist Station. And that plan was made August 2023. And it's a rural exception site, and the local need supported that they wanted some limited provision for custom self-build homes. So that site is for 12 affordable homes as well as 5 self-build homes. And they also have a further policy in the Broadclist neighbourhood plan, and that's for policy H6, and that just generally supports self-build. So that backs up policy H2, but it also provides a bit of a suite of policies that work in tandem to support custom self-build house building in the area. And lastly, just to mention Herefordshire. So they've got a phenomenal amount of made neighbourhood plans. There's 92 out of 115 parishes, I believe. And just to highlight one of those is the Much Markle neighbourhood plan, where there's 2 policies, policy HO1 and policy HO2, to do with high quality housing and also housing infill. The infill policy is to do with between existing dwellings, that they will provide in appropriate locations self-build or custom house building and affordable house building. So that's really targeting again that infill is appropriate if it's affordable or self and custom build. And the next slide, please. So just to round off with a couple of key takeaway messages, I'd say the importance of an evidence base. So look at the housing needs assessment, call for sites, local authority self-build register, look at all the data and what's the demand there and what's the housing need. Obviously, local community engagement is key. Understand the local issues and housing needs, as I've said. There's all different types, from affordable to agricultural workers to first-time buyers or smaller plots. So and then don't need to reinvent the wheel, I put there. So plenty of examples of custom self-build planning policies out there. They vary from the support to the really effective allocation policies. So I think if there's something that you think that would work in your neighbourhood plan and there's a need there, I'd look at other examples that are out there and think how that could be used in your neighbourhood plan and address the issue. Next slide, please. And just to finish off, just to say a bit more about what the task force does. We provide guidance and advice and consultancy services, as well as we do free masterclasses on different topics. We did one on neighbourhood planning last year. We do them on development management, affordable housing, and different types of custom self-build delivery models. I help run the Self-Build and Monitoring Officers Forum, and they meet quarterly. We also do study tours. So there's Graven Hill, and we've just done one in the south, which covered Bristol and South Gloucestershire. So we've got an example in South Gloucestershire called Charfield Gardens, where we have a policy where we require a percentage on large developments of custom self-build plots. So if that's anything you think you'd be interested in, please visit our website and have a look. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Now, I'm going to try and get through as many of the questions in the Q&A box as we have time for, starting with a question for Shah. How much does it cost to create and revise the neighbourhood plan over the years? Could you have worked with your local authority to achieve the same Section 106, Section 278 funding and objectives?
Thank you. The first neighbourhood plan cost us virtually nothing. We got an £8,000 grant from localities. We got some practical assistance in the form of expert advice from localities. We did not engage a consultant, and I think it cost us a couple of £100 for some exhibition events on the neighbourhood plan. That was neighbourhood plan V1. We were unable to do neighbourhood plan V2 in exactly the same manner because we needed the expert advice on design principles and design practicalities. So we engaged a consultant. Cost us £8,000, plus a bit extra for some consultation events, putting up a banner, that sort of thing. We tend to publish the information about our neighbourhood plan on an ongoing basis in every quarterly newsletter that we put out, so everybody knows about it, and it's an ongoing message to the population. The third neighbourhood plan has cost us a good bit more. We did a biodiversity offsetting study on 3 sites that cost us £2,500. We re-engaged the consultant we'd used for the second plan in a different format this time, and that cost us around £18,000. There was a significant increase at that point in time, primarily because, would you believe, on one of the developments we were putting forwards, actually came forward, the police station site actually came forward for development, and the local authority turned it down. We couldn't believe our ears, given the various nefarious reasons that they used to turn down this planning application. And one of the things they turned it down on was actually using our own neighbourhood plan against us, because we had said our neighbourhood plan would accept up to 24 houses on the site, and the new application was for 48 residential homes for the elderly that weren't full homes. They were shared facilities, so they had basically a bathroom, a kitchen, and a bedroom, and everything else was a shared facility. So the local authority decided to argue with us about our own neighbourhood plan. We and the developer went to court as a Rule 6 party at a planning appeal, and we won the planning appeal. The net result of that is that that development will be built, but it did cost us the cost of our planning consultant, and we engaged a junior barrister, and it was a junior barrister, for £3,000. And that's why the costs crept up on neighbourhood plan number 2. I do know of parishes that have spent £90,000, £100,000 on their neighbourhood plan. And that is basically because they've left all the work to the consultant. They've done none of the work themselves. They haven't been prepared to put aside enough time to become involved in creating that neighbourhood plan. So my advice would be, if you're starting out on a neighbourhood plan, get some quotes from your consultants, engage a good one, but be very specific about what you want to use them for. Have all your thinking wrapped up before you even talk to the consultant, to test that thinking against the consultants. Don't use your consultant to do your thinking for you, because that's where the big bucks comes from. Your consultant can write your policies in a way that makes them planning coherent, and believe me, planning speak is something quite different from normal English. So a consultant is useful for that purpose. But make sure that you do most of the work yourself. Do your thinking in advance of getting to the consultant, and that will keep your consultant costs down. So, you know, for small parishes looking at only a small amount of development in their area, or just looking at place shaping in their area, I don't think it needs to cost you a great deal, because you don't need a consultant. You can get advice from localities on how to write your policies. Does that help?
Yes, I think that was a very, very effective answer. I do have another question for you, Shah. How much does it cost to do proper community co-development? Sorry, I'm not sure if that's for you, Shah. Who wants to take this question?
We don't understand the question.
Yeah. Okay, I will move on to another question then. This is also for you, Shah. Could we have a description of the resources that were required to create the Newport Pagnell neighbourhood plans?
There's me, my deputy clerk, a small group of our councillors who are dedicated to the neighbourhood plan. There are 6 of them who are involved, and a couple of local residents, one of whom, fortunately for us, happens to be a retired planner. They sit on the steering group, and that's our entire network of people who were involved in designing the neighbourhood plan. We meet every 6 weeks. And even once the first neighbourhood plan was finished, we continued to meet with a neighbourhood plan implementation group. So we've never let the neighbourhood plan die. We keep active, and I think that's the message, that if you've got a neighbourhood plan, you've created a neighbourhood plan, it doesn't finish once the neighbourhood plan is published. You've got to keep at it and make sure that the neighbourhood plan actually happens. But it only took the 9 of us meeting every 6 weeks for our 3 neighbourhood plans to happen.
Thank you. Now, a question about what's involved in reviewing neighbourhood plans once they're made in terms of actual minimal legal requirements. Is it a 5-year fixed cycle where the council decides if data needs to be updated, or can it be more than every 5 years? And how also how fresh does data need to be in order to build a neighbourhood plan? I know a council that collected data in 2018, then dropped the neighbourhood plan idea altogether, and now want to restart. Is the 2018 data still usable, or is some of it still usable? Do they need to start from scratch, as it is more than 5 years old? Any kind of general steer on this you can provide would be helpful. If you want me to repeat any of that bit, let me know.
Andrew may have some comments on it, but as a general guide, some of your... I was
going to say Madeline might be able to, but yeah, I mean, there is no, Madeline, please chip in. But yeah, there's no requirement to review neighbourhood plan, but it's seen as good practice. So Madeline might be better. I'm happy to chip in as well if you want to come in, Madeline. Yeah, because I know locality have produced some really good guidance on this. So, but I don't want to, your.
No worries. I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, there's no, once your plan is made, it is in place for the duration of the plan. So usually, I think that's depending on what you've decided, 15, 20 years. And there's no requirement to update that plan. But what will happen to it if you don't update it at any point is what will happen to any planning policy, really, is that because of things changing in your local context and in national and local policy, it will sort of, the policies within it will become less and less relevant in the decision-making process, because the evidence that they're based on and how they reflect what's going on at that time will be less and less relevant. So at some point you might, especially if you've monitored sort of how your neighbourhood plan and how the policies are being used, at some point it might make sense to consider updating at least part of it, as Newport Pagnell has been particularly effective at doing. In terms of funding, just to flag, when you update a neighbourhood plan, at least the basic, every funding that you may have had from the neighbourhood planning support programme, everything gets reset. The allowances get reset, which is always good to keep in mind. Yeah, so in terms of if your aim is to make sure that the policies in the plan are reflective of what's going on, so that they can carry as much weight as possible in the decision-making process, using data that is more than 5 years old, depending on the local context and depending on the data, because some things might not change as much. It depends, obviously. But if your aim is to make sure that the plan is as relevant as possible, then it would be worth at least making sure that the data is actually still relevant and reflective of what you're trying to achieve at that point. That would be, yeah.
Thank you, Madeline. I think we have had a question from someone who says they were told that in terms of allowances for neighbourhood planning, that was cumulative over different versions. Are you able to perhaps put a link into some guidance about neighbourhood plan funding where it says that it resets?
Yes, I will put in our guidance notes in the chat now.
Perfect, thank you. Anyway, I will move on to another question now. Given the need for clarification from the government on the future of neighbourhood plans and confirmation on whether there'll be funding from March 2025, is it worth starting a neighbourhood plan now, or should we wait? And also, how long does it take to do a neighbourhood plan? Who wants to start?
I'd like to advise that I think it's always worth starting a neighbourhood plan, because the neighbourhood plan has many added advantages over and above the polished documents. I can tell you that the thinking in my council has improved, the decision-making has improved exponentially as a result of working on our neighbourhood plans, we now have much more knowledge about our parish. We now understand our residents much better, and we understand our location, our place, and the relationship of place to people. We understand all of those things in a way that we never had any understanding of previously. So I always think it's worth doing a neighbourhood plan. Yes, funding is an issue we need to continue to bash home. And my only answer to that is keep plugging your MP and saying we have to have this funding, because that is the only way it's going to happen, is if enough of the MPs agree that that should be in the budget.
Thank you, Charles. Does anyone else want to come in on that question?
I mean, I'll just echo that. I mean, echo Charles. I mean, you get, whatever happens, you're in a better position trying to improve the planning system with a neighbourhood plan than without one. But you know, right, but we do need to be mindful about the resources issue at the moment. So yes, I wouldn't say anybody don't produce a neighbourhood plan because of the uncertainty in the planning system, or don't produce a neighbourhood plan because of the uncertainty about the funding. But just be mindful of both of those.
Thank you, Andrew. Now, our next question is, can standards be set for energy efficiency and self-build? Katie? You're on mute, sorry.
Yes. Yeah, I believe they can be, yeah. And it's all part and parcel of high quality design and housing. So if we're looking at something specifically like to do with self and custom house building, generally people are looking at, they're going to do their own self-build, they're going to build it of a higher quality anyway, and they're going to have the sustainability and high eco credentials. So if you're going to have a separate policy to support that as well, I think that would be that would work well, and as part and parcel of sort of suite of policies in the neighbourhood plan.
Thank you, Katie. Now, a question about how can neighbourhood plans support climate change if biodiversity has been thrown out? Does anyone want to answer
that? Can I answer that?
Yes,
Jessica. When the examiner looked at our biodiversity policy, he did not throw out the entire policy. And I do need to emphasize that the policy remains in place. The policy supports wildlife corridors. The policy supports biodiversity thinking around planning. So the policy remains in place. What he threw out was the specific identification of sites to promote biodiversity. So I wouldn't say that all the bathwater has been thrown out with the baby included. There is still hope for biodiversity in neighbourhood plans. One just needs to be careful about how you phrase that.
Thank you, Shah. Now, is it possible to share any examples of a good neighbourhood plan? Does anyone, maybe perhaps a locality or SOCC, have any links to good neighbourhood plans that you can maybe share with our delegates?
I can put in, we have on our website quite a few case studies of specific elements of neighbourhood plans. And I can also recommend, if you've not done so already, we have a quarterly neighbourhood planning newsletter in which we sometimes also try and showcase sort of particular policies within neighbourhood plans that might be interesting or relevant to others as well.
Thank you, Madeleine. Now, can we include nature-based flooding recommendations in a neighbourhood plan? It's very timely. Is anyone able to answer that?
Yes, it'd be the short term, yes.
Yeah. Perfect, thank you. Now, we've got a question about, is this a way to bring in higher quality builds rather than the lowest common denominator, big developer energy efficiency? I think Chair will set higher standards for Graven Hill. Is that still possible?
Yes, I mean, it's a way of sort of managing development, not stopping it, isn't it? So if you do need new homes and looking in the context of self and custom build, they are of higher quality, and if the community, it's more palatable to a community, isn't it? If you've got a bit of ownership in terms of the type of housing and diversifying supply and providing more opportunities for, you know, self-building plots or self-build plots or custom build homes, or more affordable with a small a as such, and they do provide higher quality housing, and that's all to do with the fact that people are going to live in those homes for longer because they've designed it to future proof, so they are going to be sort of eco, credentials are going to be higher and more sustainable. So yes, Graven Hill is of a scale where there's very different sort of parts to that custom build scheme, but that can be done and replicated on smaller sites, small medium sites. As I said, that's included in the MPPF as well.
Thank you, Katie.
So again, I'm going to say I know the government's reforms talk about removing the phrase beautiful, but there's a logic to that. It still talks about the need for high quality and distinctive design, and that's a really key role for the neighbourhood planning process. And as I'm trying to go, talk developers with different hats on them, and they say that they don't do high quality design. Barrett's don't have a team called the Poor Quality Design Team. They think they do high quality design. But if you want something distinctive, your main mechanism to try and do that, or a higher standard or anything, is through a neighbourhood, still is through a neighbourhood plan.
Thank you, Andrew. Now,
and it's not just, sorry, just to add to that, it's not just the higher quality in terms of what you might think of as triple glazed windows or lack of boilers. Boiler issue is irrelevant anyway because legislation deals with that. There are some simple things that you can think about when you look at design principles. For example, one of the best housing developments I have seen doesn't provide garages for people, but does provide wide enough covered parking spaces. Now, a covered parking space is interesting. One, they are provided with the ability to charge your electric car. Two, they prevent you from using the space as a garage. And so you don't park on the street, you park in this covered parking space. That is a very, very simple design solution, something that can be built into a neighbourhood plan as a policy statement. Design policies that come with this kind of car storage facility are supported by this neighbourhood plan. And simple things like that work. And it's that kind of simple thinking that local people can best put in place.
Thank you, Shah. Now, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for in terms of questions from delegates. So I apologise if your question was not answered today. But I'd like to end this event by just asking our speakers to provide one piece of advice for a council looking to embark on a neighbourhood plan, starting with Andrew.
Well, my advice would be, I think that it's your plan. And I know you have to work with the constraint of the planning system, but I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty at the system, with reforms and things and funding. But I still think there's a key role. And if you feel you want to influence developments in your area, the neighbourhood plan's still the right mechanism to do it. I'm still optimistic. Yes.
Thank you, Andrew. Shah?
Just get at it. Keep going at your neighbourhood plan. Don't allow all the things that get in the way, such as inability to attend meetings and so on. Stop it. Just schedule your meetings regularly and keep going.
Thank you. Madeleine?
Use the program as much as you can. As everyone else, I wish there were more certainty around it, but it's here for now, and you have a whole team here at Locality, and you can get in touch with us, and we'll do whatever we can to help you out and so that you can make the most of the support that's available.
Katie?
I'd say look at the different types of policies that are out there for promoting and sort of supporting customer self-build house building, and particularly look at supporting and bringing forward small and medium-sized sites through allocations as well. It's essential that any policy for housing, particularly self and custom build, goes beyond more than supportive and can actually deliver those houses and maybe address those local issues and housing need.
Thank you, Katie. On that note, I will say a huge thank you to our fantastic speakers today, Madeleine, Shah, Andrew and Katie, for their valuable and insightful contributions. Please do fill out the feedback form and it appears on your screen. Our post-event mailing will go out to all attendees and it will include the chat and all of the presentations you saw today. We would like to say a huge thank you again to our partners for today's online event, Blush Air Illuminations, CCLA and Clear Council Insurance. And please don't forget to check out our brilliant online events programme for events coming up through the autumn and winter. Thank you for joining today. Goodbye.